And before we proceed, where we are joined by our guest George Papandreou by Skype, I'd like to welcome to the platform the former Prime Minister of Montenegro, Igor Lukšić, now Director for Southeast Europe at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Okay, so with the way we're going to proceed now is we're going to be joined by Skype by George Papandreou, President of the Socialist International and former Prime Minister of Greece. And Mr. Papandreou is going to speak, as all our speakers have, for 7 minutes, after which, because Mr. Papandreou also has to leave, I'm just going to put a few questions to the Minister and to Mr. Papandreou, and then we'll carry on with the other introductions. And we have plenty of time for discussion and for your questions from the floor as well. So welcome, Mr. Papandreou. Very pleased that you could join us. And we're looking forward to hear what you have to say about the situation in Europe as you see it at the moment.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for giving this opportunity to speak to you. I'm sorry I can't be in your lovely country of Montenegro. It's a beautiful country, and very happy that it's moving along on its European prospects. I believe that Europe, as the foreign minister said earlier, is going through an existential crisis. And of course, that means that we have a lot of important decisions to make. Obviously, Brexit, in my mind, was a decision which will be quite messy for Britain, first of all, for the UK, but it was also a wake-up call, I hope, for the rest of Europe. If we see it as an opportunity to see some of the problems that Europe is facing and issues that we have to deal with, then it could be seen as a crisis which becomes an opportunity for a stronger Europe, an opportunity for a more integrated Europe, an opportunity for a more democratic Europe. I would say that there are issues that have created questions, question the capacity of Europe. I am as strong that Europe has underestimated its capacity. We could have dealt with the financial crisis much more quickly, which I had to deal with as Prime Minister of Greece. Greece became the center of a burgeoning and spreading crisis, not only in Europe, but around the world, after the crisis, of course, in Wall Street. And Europe could have acted more quickly, more decisively. Had it done so, as it did in 2000, Mario Draghi, we would have been out of the crisis much more quickly. I think the same can be said with the refugee question, which concerns many countries, obviously Greece. Had we worked in a more unified fashion and more common policy on this, we could have dealt with it much more effectively. I'm not saying it would be easy, but it would be more effective. And of course, our voice in the Middle East, our voice in Southern Africa, around the world, needs to be strengthened. We can do all this, and we can mitigate some of the problems that globalization is bringing. Globalization is bringing more inequality. Large parts of our societies are not able to adapt to the new technologies. Parts of our societies are being marginalized. I think that Europe could act in stimulating both growth, but also sustainable growth, as it is doing, helping to build the infrastructure in the Balkans. This could have been a much bigger project. Now we have made some decisions in Europe on that basis, but we need to do more. A stronger Europe would also mean to continue with the Thessaloniki agenda, which was decided in 2003 under the then Greek presidency. I was then foreign minister. And we pushed it because we believe that the long-standing historical problems in the Balkans were because of the proxy war, because of the ethnic divisions, and coming into a common values, where we respect borders, where we respect ethnic identities, but at the same time make sure that there are freedoms of minorities, human rights, democratic process, freedom of movement. All these allow us to live together and to respect each other and build on our strengths. I think this is a long-standing historical desire of the people of the Balkans, of Southeastern Europe, which we see now can be realized within the context of these basic values if we all respect them. So a strong prospect of having the Balkans, Western Balkans particularly, becoming part of the European Union, full members of the European Union, is not only stabilizing, but I think it will also be a contribution to the strength of Europe, certainly in the long run. Therefore, I believe that what we are seeing in Europe now, this backlash for globalization, needs to have a strong response from European leadership, where we make Europe stronger, we make it more open and democratic, we mitigate some of the problems of globalization, such as equality and marginalization of parts of our society, with the technology. We can do it, Europe can do that, and if we do that, then I think we will see that these nationalist trends or these tribalist native trends will be sort of one of the a last sort of stand of towards the deeper integration against the integration of Europe, and Europe will move forward. If we do not make these decisions, then I will see that we'll have more fissures, more splinters, and that, of course, would be negative not only for Europe, but I think for the world.
Thank you very much indeed for those remarks. Now, as I said, before I take our next two panelists, I'm just going to put a couple of questions to the Minister and to Mr. Papandreou, who I believe you have some time, Mr. Papandreou, to stay on with
Definitely.
us. So, it's two variants of a question about democracy that I want to put to both of you. Because as well as being foreign minister and former ambassador to the US minister, you're also an expert, I believe, in problems of democratic development in the post-Yugoslav period, and you've written many books and articles about this. So we were talking earlier, I'm not sure if you heard the remarks that were made about the state of democracy in the region, but there is a perception that the Balkans in general and Montenegro in particular have regressed in recent years in this regard. So the question is, do you agree with that? And then the question for Mr. Papandreou, but you may well have something to say about this, Minister, as well. Mr. Papandreou, is would you agree that the rise of populism in Europe is at least in part a reaction to the EU's could be seen as being a victim of as well during your time in government in Greece? So a perspective about democracy both from the point of view of the region here, the Balkans, and the wider Europe, Minister.
You know, strictly speaking, from the theoretical point of view or level, Balkan countries or post-communist countries in the Western Balkans have never reached the level of so-called liberal democracy that we have in the most advantageous and most developed democracy in the West. But theoreticians are quite well off of the standing points that Balkan democracies belong to the very huge family of so-called electoral democracies or polyarchies. All of them have competitive political systems. All of them have contested and competitive elections, where the area of rule of law is a bit on the lower level than political democracy. I would say that we in the Balkans we have ups and downs, but it is very difficult to say that we have some ongoing authoritarian trend in the region. There are traits of the illiberal democracies here and there, but all the governments on all levels come and go on the elections that are very strongly and carefully observed by the relevant organizations, OSCE, ODIHR, Council of Europe, and I would say that in that level, the level of electoral democracy, we don't have anything new. It is more or less competitive process. On the other side, we can talk on some crisis in some countries, provoked not sometimes by the internal currents, sometimes by the external influences and geopolitical play. So I only can say that countries of the Western Balkans have to improve a lot in this area, but I don't think we can speak on some very serious setback of the democracies. We, along with many countries in the world, we have to work hard to fine-tune our institutions or to improve the way how they work, especially to improve the area of rule of law, independence of the judiciary, and the transparency of our business. But it is nothing new. It is what we have had here even before too. So I believe we will see more exciting maybe events, but I don't believe we are entering into any process of the setback of democracy in the region. After all the countries are candidates for the EU membership. They have to work hard to improve in this level. 3 of the countries are now members of NATO, and I don't think we will witness something what you can see in some other regions or post-communist countries.
Thank you, Mr. Papandreou. What do you have to say? I know that you're somebody who's had very close contact with this region as well, so maybe you want to say something about that, but I'm particularly interested to hear what you have to say about problems of democracy in Europe and how that relates to this populist insurgency that we've seen.
Certainly. Well, I think we could link the two. First, as the foreign minister, we are talking about democracies that are recent, are new. Even Greece is a relatively young democracy. Not so many years ago, we had a dictatorship. And democracy is not simply electing, as we've seen in the Arab Spring, not simply electing a government. It's a whole culture, it's a whole tradition, it's a set of institutions, checks and balances, and that takes time and to mature. But that gives me the basis to say that is why we need Europe. Think about the Balkans and their prospects, the Southeastern Europe, its prospect to continually be more integrated into the European Union. The European Union will be very much a guarantor, a stable process of deeper democratization over time. So we'll have ups and downs, and we have seen, unluckily, in some of the countries and our neighboring countries to Greece, some very difficult scenes in Parliament, for example, in Skopje, around the issue of democracy. But I would hope that as we are moving towards Europe, these things will be not permanent, but expressions of difficulties on the road to a deeper democratization. However, I will say, if we want to talk about wider problem of democracy, not only in Europe, but around the world, the developed democracies are facing a backlash to globalization. And that backlash often taken the form of more, I would say, populist or maybe authoritarian types of leadership styles. People seeking for more security, fearing the alienation they may feel from their work or from what's happening around the world, is maybe a knee-jerk reaction. And we are seeing it not only in Europe, we're seeing it in other parts of the world also, unluckily. Can Europe mitigate this? Can Europe change this? Well, as I said earlier, if Europe does not step up to the plate, if you like, to really mitigate the difficulties of globalization, then we will see more splintering, and I would say also more authoritarianism, unluckily. And the splintering may go along ethnic lines. I felt this all during the crisis. We tried to scapegoat each other, not just Greece, for the financial crisis. Yes, Greece had its problems. We had to deal with them. We were dealing with them, but it was too easy to stereotype Greeks as lazy. We work more hours than anybody else in the European Union, according to figures. But this kind of rhetoric, sort of xenophobic, took hold, and that has been entering in Europe. Now, if you talk about democracy in Europe, yes, I think it was a very big mistake when some of the European leaders reacted when I decided to call a referendum, which their reaction, of course, and finally, did lead, of course, to a government which we created with an alliance and a wider, we had a wide consensus, if you like. That's what I wanted to find through the referendum. However, that was a very negative act against democratic. It does mean, however, that we have to see how we democratize Europe. And I think there's a difference between seeing democracy at the national level and democracy at the European level. What is missing right now is not to go back to our national democracies and break away from this union because we don't have a democratic type of a European Union, as I would see it. But let's see how we can further democratize the European Union itself. Not simply be ruled by a strong bureaucracy or maybe the larger countries. Why don't we elect the head of or the president of the council, or merge those two positions and elect it directly from our citizens? Why don't we see that type of democratization in the European Union? So I would say, yes, there is a question of democracy in Europe, but it doesn't mean go back to our national hideouts, if you like. We should see how we deepen democracy within the European institutions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Papandreou, for joining us. It's been a great pleasure for us to listen to your perspectives on Europe and on this region too. And I think you made a very clear point there that the direction in which you think Europe needs to go is to deepen democracy Europe-wide rather than to go down the route of a return to national decision-making or national sovereignty in the way that is being expressed in the Brexit vote and in some part in the French election. And no doubt we're going to carry on those discussions, and I'm sure there'll be some disagreements on the panel, but thank you very much again, Mr. Papandreou, and see you next time.
Send to Montenegro and leader participate much.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll carry on.
He deserves a round of applause.
Okay. I don't know if he's still listening.